Hi, my name is Maria Finnegan, and I am the Director of Communications at the New Hampshire Children's Trust, and I'm also now a co-facilitator for Climate Cafes, Parent Climate Cafes. We just had our first one in Montshire this past weekend, and it was amazing. And it is my privilege to introduce our moderator, Jen Alford-Teester, who is a public health scientist and program manager for community health at New London Hospital. And for those who don't know Jen, she's kind of like a community leader and superhero in New Hampshire, and her name's everywhere. So it's really amazing that she's going to be a part of this with us. She's also a ray of sunshine, I'll just say that. And she's a mom, a mighty mom, some might say. So she is going to be moderating with you all and the wonderful Elizabeth. And thank you all for being here.
Oh, thank you, Maria. What a kind and generous introduction. And I feel the same about you, just a beaming ray of sunshine. Thank you so much for having me here. It is complete with pleasure that I'm here. I was able to participate in the Climate Cafe on Saturday, which was really fun and very informative and grounding. And it was such a privilege to participate. And now I get to introduce Elizabeth in this space. Elizabeth Bechard is the Senior Policy Analyst for Mom's Clean Air Force. She leads the organization's work on climate change and mental health. She has also authored Parenting in Climate in a Changing Climate, Tools for Cultivating Resilience, Taking Action, and Practicing Hope in the Face of Climate Change. She is a wonderful addition to the work and has many insights, and also is very powerful in how she leads the group session. So I'm excited to be here tonight to see you again so soon. So welcome, Elizabeth, and welcome you all to the event tonight.
Thank you so much, Jen, Maria, and Emily. It is so good to share a space with y'all tonight to talk about a topic that is very close to my heart, and I imagine very close to probably each of your own hearts in unique ways as well. As I pull up my slides, I am curious to hear where y'all are calling in from tonight. So if you would drop in the chat where you are in the world. I know some of us are in New England. I'm in Essex, Vermont, and I also recognize some familiar faces that I know are from other places as well. So I'd love to hear where you're from as I pull up my slides. Let's see. Can someone tell me if you can see this?
Yep.
Yes, okay. I see
yes.
Sutton, New Hampshire. Thank you. Washington, D.C., Litchfield, Dublin, Pittsburgh, Concord, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Boston. Wonderful. It is so good to see all of you here tonight. So we are here to talk about what it means to parent in a time of climate change. And climate change is, of course, something that we experience collectively, but it's also a very personal topic, especially for those of us who love children or raising children, whether we're parents, grandparents, or just have other beloved children in our lives. These are my own twins, Milo and Minnie. They are 7 years old now, but this is one of my favorite pictures of them from when they were very young. And I remember so well my own experience of waking up to climate change, if you will, when they were very young. It was around 2018 when I really felt shook by my awareness of climate change for the first time. There was a major hurricane that hit North Carolina in 2018 that just devastated the state and battered Wilmington, North Carolina. I don't know if any of y'all know Wilmington, but it's a coastal part of the state that did not look the same after this storm went through. And it was the place where my mother and my grandmother and many sort of generations back on my mother's side of the family were from. And it wasn't the same place anymore after this storm came through. And I remember feeling deep grief about that. And then just weeks after Hurricane Florence came through, the 2018 IPCC report came out. This was a major intergovernmental climate report. And I don't know if any of you all remember the headlines that went with that 2018 report, but they were along the lines of, hey, there's 12 years left to save the planet. And I remember, just coming out of the fog of new motherhood at the time with 2-year-old twins thinking, my gosh, like those 12 years are the years are less than the length of my kids' childhood, and feeling both like I desperately needed to figure out something to do about climate change, having no idea where to begin on that front, and feeling just deep grief and anxiety about the whole thing. And I wonder if some of you have a version of that story as well, whether you are a parent or a grandparent, or coming to this space in another way. I'm imagining there may have been a moment for you when you sort of had a deeper realization or awareness of climate change, and just offer that for reflection for a few moments. What is it like for you to be a parent or a grandparent, or anyone, a human alive who cares in these times? And you might reflect on this silently for a moment, but I also invite you to drop a few words in the chat if you're willing. And hopefully we'll have some space at the end to talk about this. Anybody want to share what comes to mind? We can save thoughts and reflections for the end if you like, but if you do have anything that comes to mind, I see one note in the chat: to live with the double presences of anxiety and mind-numbing stasis. Yes, that's a really good way to put it. The depth of sadness, it's hard to articulate. Yes. Took a class on climate change and my heart dropped. Yes, that is an experience I can relate to myself in many ways. So feel free to keep adding these on the chat as you reflect on them. As we enter this conversation, I want to name clearly and explicitly that there is no universal experience of parenting. I walk through the world as a white person with many identities of privilege, and often people like me may never have experienced an existential threat like climate until waking up to climate change. And yet we know that many communities around the world have experienced, are experiencing existential threats like slavery, genocide, forced migration, ongoing systemic racism and trauma. And all of these different sort of layers of experience and layers of our identity impact how we experience climate change. They impact how we experience parenting, and this intersection between the two. And I wish we could probably spend a whole hour talking about just this slide, but I wanted to name clearly that there are so many different layers that impact how we relate to this topic of parenting and climate change. And one lens that I want to offer as a sort of point of reflection as we move into talking about this tonight is this idea of moral injury. And moral injury is the experience of psychological harm resulting from witnessing or engaging in actions that violate an individual's core sense of moral values, your sort of deeply held beliefs, or from betrayal by a trusted leader or authority. And I first heard about the term moral injury in the context of climate change a couple of years ago. There was a paper that was published in The Lancet about the experiences of 10,000 young people around the world in relationship to climate change. And this was really a landmark paper that found that climate change has a profound impact on young people's mental health. But one of the things that came out of this paper was the idea that young people are experiencing moral injury because of government's utter failure to act on climate change at the speed and scale required to meaningfully address this crisis. They feel betrayed, which makes a lot of sense. And then a few years back, I decided to go back to school to try to get my master's degree in public health, in the process of sort of reorienting my career towards climate change. And I did a thesis project on climate change and parents' mental health. And one of the things that I found in this project, it was a literature review, was that it was really clear to me that parents are also experiencing dimensions of moral injury in the context of climate change. There's really nothing more core to a parent's sense of identity than being able to protect and care for their children. That is what parents want most in the world. And climate change directly interferes with parents' ability to care for their children in extremely painful ways. Many parents are worried that they will be unable to protect their children from harm from climate impacts. I wonder if any of you can relate to this. There was a survey that came out from Stanford earlier this year. It was a survey of parents of young children from around the United States, and found that 78% expressed worry about climate change and the impact that it might have on their children. Another paper exploring eco-reproductive concerns. Those are concerns about what it means to have or to raise children in a time of environmental crisis. And this paper found that 96.5% of parents of climate concerned potential parents report an overwhelmingly negative expectation of a climate change future, which is to me, a really striking number. Many parents are distressed by being unwillingly complicit in systems of harm. This was a theme that came up quite a bit in our climate cafes this past weekend. The more and more we learn about climate change, the more we become aware that fossil fuel, use for energy is what is causing climate change, and that nearly every single aspect of our lives is woven into this fossil fuel infrastructure. And for parents who deeply want a safe and healthy future for their children, and yet also need to do things like, put diapers on their on their babies, and manage to put food on the table in times when they're often overwhelmed by work or other duties, often find themselves having to make choices that go against these values in ways that create profound moral distress. This was a quote from a paper on parent climate activists in the UK that really, I think, highlights this idea of like being distressed by these everyday activities that we often have very little choice in. And it describes a woman's experience after the birth of her child, about how she suddenly felt deeply anxious about car use. And, most of us, unless we, live in a very walkable community, which is amazing, and I hope we can all live in those communities someday, but most of us have to use cars to do things like get to the grocery store, to buy food for our children, or to get our children to school, or to visit family. And so, these things that are really part of the functions of parenthood are also causing harm, and that can cause profound distress for parents. Many parents are distressed by the difficult tasks of parenting in a changing climate, and one of the tasks that emerges as distressing for many parents is having climate conversations with children. But more and more, there's acknowledgement that children deserve honest and age-appropriate conversations about climate change, and that's something that I absolutely agree with. And yet, there's also research showing that many parents are worried that they're going to exacerbate their children's distress about climate change. They worry how and when to have these conversations. And there's also research showing that up to 40% of parents feel that their own emotional distress about climate change is a barrier to talking with their children about climate change. And so, parents are often sort of given advice that they, need to have these conversations with children when they're not really getting the support that they need to process their own emotional distress. This is a quote from the literature review that really stood out to me as well, that parents are left to walk a tightrope between being honest and being comforting, between empowering their kids and weighing them down with the responsibility of saving the world. And that experience of sort of constantly being on a tightrope is one that I hear many parents articulate. Climate change is one of many frightening risks that parents face. This was, to me, a really striking theme in the academic literature, that it's never just climate change that parents are worried about. It's climate change plus gun violence in schools. It's climate change plus racism, plus, a growing inequality and economic problems. So there's really this sense for many parents of being in a time of polycrisis that is quite overwhelming. And that's on top of the challenges of just parenting, under, uncomplicated circumstances. So parents are really holding a lot right now, and climate change is just one of many frightening things to think about. Many parents have eco-reproductive concerns. And again, these are it's sort of the fancy academic term for the idea of maybe worrying about what it means to raise children in a time of climate change. One theme I hear come up quite a bit is that for parents who maybe already have a child but are trying to decide whether or not to expand their family, sort of thinking about climate change often comes into that decision-making process, sometimes in ways that are stressful or painful. And one thing that showed up in the literature was that there's a small percentage of parents who may even feel regret about having children due to a sense of hopelessness and despair about climate change. And to me, the idea that any parent would feel regret about having a child because of climate change is both heartbreaking and just a profound form of moral injury. And so why does the framing of moral injury matter? Why is it useful? I believe that it's useful because how we think about a challenge affects how we think about responding to a challenge. And to me, the idea of an injury implies a need for care, for tending, for repair, and not attempts to fix, ignore, or give advice. And I also believe moral injury opens up possibilities for finding deeper alignment with personal values and taking actions towards climate justice. There's a really wonderful paper that came out earlier this year on moral injury and climate justice. And one of the things this paper pointed out is that, many times individuals in the global north, like most of us, I'm imagining, who live in societies that are consuming more than our fair share of carbon energies may feel, guilt about that. And yet when we link our feelings of distress to our morals, to our values, then possibilities for acting on those values may open up in new ways. And from there, possibilities for acting on climate justice can potentially open up. So really want to underline that supporting children requires supporting parents. This showed up multiple times in the academic literature, that parents need to be cared for in order to become the parents who care for their children in a time of climate change. And parents are a large portion of the global population, and parents deserve support because they are worthy human beings. But another really important thing to underline is that when children need parents who are warm, responsive, connected, emotionally healthy in order to cope with the profound stress that climate change is causing, will continue to cause. And in order to be those warm, responsive, caring parents really need support themselves. And so I want to offer a few ideas for how parents can find support. Parents are often given advice. I see this showing up in a lot of media articles where, it'll be 5 steps for helping your kids manage their climate anxiety and things like that. And, those articles are important. We often seek them out, but we also need support, care, and opportunities to participate in actions of repair. And so some ways to do this. I cannot recommend highly enough the need for parents to find, and all of us to find spaces where we can process climate emotions with others. And group spaces are emerging as a really valuable way to do this. We held climate cafes at a children's museum here in Vermont this past weekend, and climate cafes are group spaces where people can come together to talk about how they're thinking and feeling about climate change without fear of being, the weird mom who brings everyone down by admitting that they're a little nervous about the state of the world. Other models include the Good Grief Network, which is really an amazing peer support model that's sort of longer. It's a 10-step program than climate cafes, which tend to be more one-off spaces. Climate book groups are also a really amazing and sort of easy, accessible way for people to find others to talk to about climate change. Talking with trusted loved ones is really valuable. There's also an emerging field of climate psychology, and for people who need more support, perhaps than peer support, climate-aware therapy is an increasingly valuable resource, and there are directories for finding climate-aware therapists. One thing that is, I think, really profound is this sort of growing acknowledgement that when we really lean into the painful emotions that we feel around climate change, this can at times allow climate change to be a catalyst for personal growth, for transformation and meaning, and even, dare I say it, hope. For many people, climate change is a wake-up call, and there's potential for process climate grief, which is not a one-off thing. It's sort of an ongoing process to be alchemized into joy, into energy for climate action, and even a deeper love for the world. This is a quote from a well-known climate scientist whose name many of you would probably recognize. And it showed up in an academic paper, and he is a dad, and he describes his experience of going through profound grief about climate change, letting himself cry over ecosystems, worrying about terrible future scenarios. And he says, letting in the grief allowed me to reach acceptance and get to work. Welcoming their grief enables parents to process it and afterwards to feel genuine energy and joy. Some other ideas for parents to find support themselves are engaging in personal practices to build resilience. And these practices may look different for everyone as an individual. I've heard someone describe, Britt Ray actually describe the idea of creating an existential toolkit, which I think is a really brilliant way of framing this, but sort of finding the practices that help you as an individual cope. And some of the ones that are helping people to cope are practices of mindfulness, paying attention to the present moment, spiritual practices. More and more climate activists in my own circle are turning to Buddhist practices, which I find really interesting as a way of coping with their own sort of distress and worries of the world. Connecting with ancestral resilience and wisdom can be deeply meaningful for many people, and remembering that their own ancestors may have faced many, many challenges in the past. Spending time in nature when health and safety allow, prioritizing pleasure, rest, and joy. The need for this also came up as a theme in our climate cafes this past weekend, that joy can be just an incredible and necessary strategy for staying healthy and staying engaged in climate work. And limiting distressing news. This one can be, I think, especially important for people who work in climate change or who have a lot of exposure to and engagement in climate change. None of us were meant to consume disaster 24/7, and having healthy boundaries around news can be really useful. Finding ways to take meaningful action is also a beautiful coping strategy. Action can be seen as a form of meaning-focused coping. A question that I like to offer to parents or anyone is, what kind of person, what kind of parent is climate change inviting you to become? And so sitting with a question like that might open up possibilities for ways that you would like to participate in climate action. And collective action is best whenever possible. There's research showing that taking action with other people versus individual actions like recycling at home, like collective action is associated with mental health benefits, and it's also more powerful because you're acting with others. So joining a climate group where you can be with other people is hugely valuable. Talking with other people, learning about local climate initiatives like New Hampshire healthcare workers for climate action. Other ways to take action are getting engaged by contacting your representatives. Remember, one thing that I did when my kids were younger, especially, was I would make a habit of calling my representatives while they were at the playground and I was watching them, swing on the swings. I just made it a habit that when I was at the playground, I was calling my representatives and asking them to act on climate. So there's ways to work it into your life, even if you are a busy parent. And taking climate action at home, things like reducing the amount of animal products that you eat, reducing food waste. These things make a difference too collectively. And so some ideas for how parents can support our children. Practicing having brave conversations can be really meaningful. We'll talk a little bit more about how to do that in a moment. Supporting children and building emotional resilience, especially through connected relationships, and taking climate action together. So having climate conversations with children can be difficult for many parents. I've heard so many parents express that they don't know how or when to begin these climate conversations, and just want to offer deep compassion to anybody who may have struggled with how or when to talk to your own child about climate change. But some ideas for how to go about this, finding honest and age-appropriate ways to talk to kids about climate change is important. And I would always encourage parents to find their own support and processing some of your own emotions first, if possible, before diving into climate conversations with your children. You can ask children what they know about climate change and what they're feeling. Older kids especially have heard about climate change in school. They've heard it, on the news. They've heard their peers talk about it, and they may have a lot to say about climate change. It's important to acknowledge and validate children's feelings. So just letting kids know that what they are feeling is a completely normal response to what's happening, and not trying to brush it away by saying things like, it'll all be fine. It may not be fine, and acknowledging that honestly, and acknowledging the feelings that kids are having can be incredibly important. One thing that has been really valuable for parents with younger kids is children's books. Here's a picture of a book that I really like. I would say age 5 to 9 age group, called Coco's Fire, that features a little squirrel who is experiencing climate distress and finds ways to sort of process her climate emotions. And it's a really beautiful story. Another resource that I would offer is a set of scripts from the Climate Mental Health Network. So if you don't already know about the Climate Mental Health Network, this is a resource that I think you're really going to appreciate. They have a whole section on their website for resources for parents, as well as specific scripts for how to talk to young people about climate emotions. So those may be really valuable for parents if you'd like to feel more confident, perhaps, in going into climate conversations with your children. Supporting children and building emotional resilience is really important. We know that, again, the children who have warm, connected, responsive caregivers are better able to cope with the stresses of life, and that includes climate stresses. So any sort of parenting practices that help you to feel emotionally connected to your children and really paying attention and being attuned to their world can be extremely valuable. I personally have found hand-in-hand parenting and the Good Inside parenting models really useful, but there are other models as well. Whenever it is possible and safe, enjoying time in nature with children can be profoundly healing for everyone, but also I acknowledge that it's not always possible and it's not always safe. Access to green space is not distributed equitably, and there are more and more days, unfortunately, when it isn't as safe to be outside. And so that can make, in some ways, the spaces and the times when we can be outside all the more precious. Modeling healthy emotional regulation skills with your children can be helpful. I know that is easier said than done. It's something that I'm, constantly my own learning journey with. And for older kids, paying attention to the climate messages they're getting from the media and social media can be important as well, in helping them to kind of think through their own process of coping with climate change and building resilience. This is a quote from a Vermont resident named Naomi Alfini, who wrote an essay that was published in our local 7 Days publication several months ago. And she says, it's not that kids won't experience climate distress. They will. They're living in the same world we are. They'll flip their lids. But after borrowing our calmness in the moment so many times, they'll learn to access their own over time. That's how working through our climate anxiety can help our kids learn to manage their own. I really loved that quote, and the idea of having our children be able to borrow our own calmness. Another thing that's really powerful another powerful way for parents to support their children is to take climate action together. Intergenerational climate action is incredibly powerful modeling, and it can take a number of different shapes and forms. One idea is to join a family-centered climate group. My own organization, Moms Clean Air Force, often engages in intergenerational action. You can see here is a picture of an activism and art event that happened in our organization early on in the pandemic. Taking children to family-friendly climate events can be a great way to engage them in climate action and to show them that you care, that you're paying attention and doing something. Helping children to contact their representatives, whether that's having young children draw a picture, or with older children, maybe helping them to write an email or pick up the phone. And even simple activities like cleaning up trash outside, cooking plant-based meals together, planting pollinators. There really are endless ideas for parents and children to take climate action together. And empowering older children can be incredibly powerful too. This is an image from earlier this year. Moms Clean Air Force partnered with an organization called Schools for Climate Action, and they're mostly in California, but also all over the country, group of young people, some of whom experienced extraordinarily devastating wildfires in California. And one of the ways that these high school students process their own climate distress was by writing legislation to Congress demanding funding and resources for climate change and youth mental health. And so Moms Clean Air Force and other adult allies showed up to support them and asking Congress for support around climate change and young people's mental health. And it was a really powerful intergenerational action. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully we'll have time for some discussion and questions. And I'll see what's in the chat.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Wow, that is a tremendous amount of information. I know that for some, if you know, don't want to assume how much folks know or how much you don't know, and I thought it might be helpful in the Q&A section to talk about, one, what brought people here? Is it a learning experience? Is it a shared processing experience? Because I find that sort of motivation really interesting and helpful as we navigate discussions. So we have about 15 or 20 people. Anybody willing to share with us what brought you to the table today? And if you have any sort of pressing question or for Elizabeth that you'd like to lead off with. Carol, I know you, so maybe you could share with us what brought you to the table.
That's really putting me on the spot here.
I know. It's a dance party. Let's dance.
So I thought this is great. I love the integrational approach to how I always call him Dr. Bob has brought this climate change group together initially, and their presentation was lovely of how communities can bring things together. I was fortunate the last couple of years to work with UNH and building community resilience, and it was a great opportunity to meet a lot of people. And recently we learned about Jen, and we asked her to come to the group. But we have this network that meets regularly, and out of that UNH Resiliency Extension Grant, and it has allowed us to learn about really this underlying concern people have in many different communities or groups they associate, but they all come back to health and well-being, and the central part of it being how we balance the mental part, or how we learn from our experiences and learn how to make those changes. So I think this is great, and I appreciate your insights. I do run a small grassroots nonprofit organization called Sunset Hill Educational Institute, and it is it's the home of Wheelchairs, Health and Motion and All Children Nature's Way. And so we do programs mostly in the fair weather time right now. And I was actually thinking, when it was all going on, you're talking about climate cafes, and then how to build hope in kids and stuff. It would be nice. Lyndon Radin on the show, the program audience, and Dr. Bob, and sort of have a cafe with kids doing environmental things. up here. But I just think you got to start talking about it, and I think a lot of your practical steps, Elizabeth, that you mentioned, are extremely pertinent, and keep on talking.
That's great, Carol. And I really love the bridge with the work that you do and the Climate Cafe. It'd be really interesting to bring those two things together. Because one thing I think from the Climate Cafe the other day that really stood out to me, and that Elizabeth's work stands out to me, is this bridge of we experience the existential grief and fear, and also we lead ourselves to a place of resilience through action. And I think that the first part of being able to get to the action is just acknowledging and validating and feeling the feeling that comes up. So then you can say, well, what am I going to do with this feeling? And then take action.
Yeah.
I think you're very good at that, Elizabeth, at doing the both and.
Yeah. And I love working with your children doing it. That's the piece I actually get a little sad about, is seeing some apathy of our society. And I then it brings me to gratefulness that I'm on the other side of the spectrum here. So but it's important for everybody to get who have young children to really say this is important. And
yeah.
And how do you build hope with your children? And how do you get them? Because sooner or later they're gonna have to carry the torch. And so okay.
Yes.
Want to respond briefly, Carol. I really just resonate with what you said about being sad about apathy in our society. And, one thing that has helped me with that is sort of being reminded that, states like denial and apathy are also emotional responses to climate change. They're, what happens when humans kind of go into this freeze mode and it's so overwhelming that they can't even cope. And so when we sort of have spaces like climate cafes, and I see a comment in the chat of wanting to explain that a little bit more, but spaces where we can talk about climate change and generally allow ourselves to fully experience our emotions, it can help sort of thaw a little bit of that freeze mode for people. And so engaging in conversation, I believe, is a powerful tool for helping to combat apathy. And so we just underline that. And climate cafes, for those who are not familiar with that model, the Climate Cafe model emerged from activism in the United Kingdom. I believe it emerged from the Death Cafe movement. And death is another fun party topic. But these are spaces for people to come together and talk about their thoughts and feelings about topics like death or climate change, in a space where that is explicitly the point. And there's no pressure to take any action at the end. There's no sort of underlying agenda. You're just really there to connect with other people and listen to others and share your own experience. And it's a very simple model, but also one that can be really powerful.
So I see a few folks have come up. I see Emily, you have a question. Would you like to share?
Sure. Thanks so much. This is really rich, and I really loved your book. I feel like it's so helpful. And I guess what's coming up for me is some ideas have been coming up as you were talking. I mean, we organized a group to read All We Can Save together, and really loved that book. I love The Intersectional Environmentalist, your book, the Active Hope, Joanna Macy's work. And I think I kind of come at this from environmental justice. Like, I did a lot of that work at Duke. And I'm trying to kind of, in this moment of life, kind of bridge more somatic work with kind of racial equity work and eco-grief work, because it feels like so much of this lives in our body. And if we're not tuning into that, the grieving process is much more difficult. And, but I also really loved that quote you had about, like, kind of that, I won't be able to quote it, but what you were saying about our children, giving our children resilience, and they can like feel into the hope that we hold. And I think that's where I'm trying to think more creatively. Like some ideas that came up today were, I had that All We Can Save circle, but like I want to, that book that you recommended, the cocoa one, maybe it's about having book circles with parents and children so that they can,
Yeah.
my daughter is 7 too, she can see us all coming together to talk about this book and say joys, sorrows about it. Maybe it's about also having engagement opportunities, because like I'll call Congress people with my daughter, like she sort of gets it, she sort of doesn't. But maybe it's about also having intergenerational, like very specifically like young children, older grandparents, so that she can see, like the moral injury piece is so huge, but so that we can actively be doing things, and maybe a small group of 7, but so she can see everybody cares, everybody across the generations cares. But I wonder if you have other creative ideas or ways of really trying to teach our children, show our children by example that like actually we are in this together, and this is a small way that we can do this work over the long term, and it also be fun.
Yeah, there's so much there, and I really appreciate the sort of highlighting the importance of somatics that are like the way this lives in our bodies. One of the things I love about the Cocoa Spire book is that it actually addresses that. It was written by child psychiatrists, I believe, and it sort of talks about the somatic experience of climate anxiety in a way that I hadn't seen in any other children's book specific to climate. And that point, so that book, I think, is a really great tool for young children. The one thing that, I will say is with what I'm trying to practice in my own life, I can't offer it as an advice because I don't know if it's going to work yet, because I'm, in this journey with you as a parent. But I try to think of things as being cumulative. So little actions sort of adding up here and there. And I don't live a perfectly climate friendly life every single day, but I do try to sort of point my children's attention to things that we are doing to care for the earth as often as possible. I do take them to climate events. I do sort of talk to them about climate change on a regular. They know what I'm doing tonight. They know I'm down here talking to other people about climate change. And so I think one of the things that is hardest for parents, at least for me, speaking for myself, is that there's often this feeling of never really knowing if what we're doing is the right thing. There's no there's no evidence-based practice for how to not screw this up. This parenting in a time of climate change thing. And so that there's some leap of faith involved and sort of hoping that showing up the best that you can. But I really do believe that these sort of little things over time add up. There's another book that I really loved that was called Raising Elijah by Sandra Steingraber. I don't know if any of y'all have read that book. It's older. I think it was probably written in 2011 or so, and does touch on climate change, but not really. Climate change was not seen in quite the same way back then. But the author talks about how she was in a classroom one day, and I guess she was talking about climate change in this particular story, and how all of these, second graders or something along those lines are being told that, the polar bears were dying, and, this very grim picture of climate change. And someone was asking the kids if they were, worried about climate change, and this, one kid, the one kid who wasn't worried was the one whose mom was working on it. And that was, to me, I'm probably totally butchering that version of the story, but the idea that the one kid who knew that their parent was doing something was the one who was able to cope in that scenario. And so to me, that was just like, underlining the little things that we do, and like sort of talking about it and telling our children that we are doing these things for this reason, I think, and hope that will add up over time. So
Elizabeth, I don't know if you saw the note in the chat from Mikhail. I think that's a pretty common experience we're hearing from folks. And I don't know if Michael, if you'd like to expand on that, or if you'd like to reflect on that a little bit, Elizabeth. Also, my daughter Birdie says hello.
Hi, Birdie. Well, Michael, I'm not sure how you pronounce your name.
Yeah, not
coming
sure.
off of mute.
Hi, wait, am I?
You're there.
Okay. Well, I'm here with my partner, Michael, and I just got back from work, but I was listening in while driving, and we were really just so excited to see this happening, this conversation happening. We've felt really unmet by people that we know, and he's in the realm of conservation. I work in healthcare, and we're just well aware of these issues. And we really wanted to have children, and now we're getting closer, and it's just, yeah, it feels really messed up in some ways, and we kind of sometimes feel guilty because we know also how grateful we are, and thanks for giving us a space to share that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You are definitely not alone in that experience. I've heard so many folks describe that same experience of wrestling with the decision of whether or not to have children, and then, going through this experience of pregnancy or waiting for a child to arrive in some other way, and being just full of every kind of emotion. I don't know if you have read Britt Ray's book, Gen Dread, or heard of it, but I would highly recommend that for you specifically. It's great for everyone. But Britt Ray is a climate communications researcher whose own climate awakening came when she and her partner were trying to decide whether or not to have children. And she talks in that book about her own experience of kind of going through this, am I going to do this or not? And then has a child, spoiler alert. But it's also a great book about climate psychology in general. So I think reading that book might be really a great companion for you in this next phase.
Thanks for sharing that. I don't know if the book speaks to this or if anyone has advice on this too, but a hard thing for us is an excited family and friends who, all the things they want to get for our kid and do, and just this worry because we've been able to live a certain way just ourselves, and we want our child to have joy, but we want to, show gratitude for those who want to help bring them that, but it's just difficult to navigate and not come across hard-headed or something.
Yeah, I really hear that. And, at the Parent Climate Cafe this weekend, I think that topic came up a lot, and just this feeling of parents, being imposed upon by their loved ones, maybe lifestyle choices or consumer choices, if you want to put it that way. And so that's a common theme, and yet, one that I think there are ways to sort of navigate, and having other people who are navigating it too can be really useful. So yeah, I see, be prepared for the influx of plastic. That is a hard one. That is a hard one.
But the positive side is some people who have really never understood how we live and who we are starting to get it a little bit. It's not enough, but we're seeing that move, and it's a little easier for me than my partner, I think, to kind of see the silver lining in that. But
yeah, I hear you.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. It's so real and important, and pretty common. You're not alone. I'm grateful to Elizabeth for providing the space to be able to share those feelings. I see that Michelle has her hand raised. I'd like to welcome you to share your thoughts.
Thank you. So I'm Michelle Wagner. Pardon me. There, got my hand down. And I'm also getting over COVID, so I sound terrible, and it's dark in here because I don't want you really seeing how I'm looking right now. So thank you so much for this. It was wonderful. I first of all would like to know if the slides are going to be made available.
Yes.
The quote about passing on calm, I think is just really important. I work in the mental health field. So I work at NAMI, New Hampshire, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I finished out a degree this summer down at Boston University with a course called Religion and Climate Change. So I was just immersed in this topic, and it's really at the forefront. So when I saw this this presentation, I was super excited, because I agree that I love about the kids that don't worry are the kids whose parents are doing something. Well, I want to be that grandparent. Oh, and I'm going to get teary. Pardon me. Because I worry about it. I'm really, really worried about it. So the Climate Cafe sounds fabulous. I went to the website and signed up, and I just want to do what I can. And I'm happy to be here. And certainly mental health wise, I have access to that community. So I'm happy to help out there.
Thank you so much for all that you shared, Michelle, and sending healing thoughts your way. I really want to underline what you said about just the experience of being a grandparent who cares deeply. I think we often leave grandparents out of the conversation when it comes to parenting, but you're definitely not alone. And I hope that we can create more resources, maybe even specifically for grandparents, as well as intergenerational resources, because we know that there are just unique layers to these experiences. So thank you for naming that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we have a few more minutes if there are additional questions or comments for Elizabeth. I see a lot of head nodding and agreement with a lot of what's been saying. I think it's very reassuring to know that we're not alone, and also have been equipped with some ways to think about how we raise our children and the conscientiousness. I know when we were at the Climate Cafe the other day, I have a personal feeling that having a child is an act of hope, even in this very broken world, that creating a human being is essentially saying there is space for joy, there is space for resilience, and it is difficult to, in some circumstances, when we have the wildfire smoke that comes up, and we haven't used AC in New Hampshire, which I never used growing up, but need it now because of my asthma that I acquired as an adult because of air quality issues. And so those are very real. So it's the both and really grateful for these perspectives, the reassuring. Are there other folks who'd like to share thoughts or have questions for Elizabeth? Let's see. Meredith says, struggling with structure. I want it to be mom parent based, but I don't want to feel exclusive of grandparents or other community members. Any advice?
It's really great that you want to start something. That's exciting. So I just want to acknowledge and honor that first. Yeah, in terms of the structure, it's interesting. I work for Moms Clean Air Force, and the name of our organization is, pretty, mom focused. And so there's been this tension between, do we sort of expand it to moms and parents and caregivers? We've started in our languaging to sort of expand the way that we talk about it to be more inclusive than the name implies. I think it's great to have all comers, right? And just to see who shows up. I think intergenerational activism is incredibly powerful and can be really healing. That said, offering maybe smaller spaces, as we did with a parent-focused Climate Cafe, is one way to offer sort of space for a unique dimension of, this sort of climate experience within perhaps a larger organization that maybe speaks to anyone who wants to come. I don't know if I'm answering your question very well, but feel free to ask me to expand. But I think it's great to have anyone who wants to show up be welcome.
Yeah, sometimes you can start small. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a neighborhood, maybe it's a couple of folks at work that are interested and want to have a one-on-one, and then from there you sort of snowball it into a movement. Do what I think what Elizabeth's saying, I feel similarly, is do what you're comfortable with, and just as long as you do.
I think one thing that can be helpful with helping parents and specifically engage in activism is providing structures that sort of acknowledge the reality of being a parent. And I think that's one way to sort of make it parent friendly, and then others who come just have to understand that there may be people breastfeeding or changing diapers or doing parent things during a given event or whatever it may be. But with the parent climate cafes this weekend, we provided childcare.
That was huge.
That made it possible. And so of course anybody could come, but it really made it possible for people who have young children to take care of to be there. And so offering parent-friendly sort of structure and whatever you do will probably draw in parents, and then others may show up too. So good luck. And Maria says it also allowed couples to attend. Yes,
that's right.
That was really powerful.
That's right. Let's see. Oh, that's wonderful, Lyndon. Oh, dads.
Climate
Chris,
dads.
would you like to
Yes.
share this resource and talk to us a little bit about this? This is great.
It just popped into my head. Not a whole lot to it, just a quick I'm a subscriber to Bloomberg Green, a couple of their newsletters. And I thought that was pretty cool. They I don't know if they coined that term, but I thought that was pretty cool. And I think, thinking about Mom's Clean Air Force, and there's this kind of this is probably tied up in kind of American parenting norms that, dads don't show emotion or don't think, I don't know, whatever, insert your own generalization there, but I thought it was pretty cool, that article, and thinking about the role that dads have to play in kind of getting jazzed on new technologies or climate action or whatever. And just for a little background, I'm a clean energy worker, and I think the thing, and I'm also I should probably have led with this, I have a 3-month-old son at home. So I'm 2 weeks into paternity leave, so doing the whole dad thing now. But I would just say, personally, I feel very fortunate to work in clean energy and work in a space where every single day I get to go and do something about the problem. And I've found that very soothing, spiritually, mentally, to actually, and some of that, the presentation, spoke to this is action, be it small, large, in between, is really a nice balm for some of the angst that I think all of us can understand, feeling. So and one thing I would say about kids, our company does a ton of education, and I think the silver lining here is that there's so many opportunities to get involved, new businesses, new technologies, all kinds of different avenues that maybe not the youngest kids you can talk to about, but if teenagers or middle schoolers talking about, we need hundreds of thousands of electricians to make the transition in this country that we need to for beneficial electrification. So talking to people, kids and adults, about all the opportunities that are out there, I think is a great way to remain proactive. And but I thought that article was cool, so I just wanted to share.
Well, thanks for sharing.
What
I've
up,
not seen it,
Michael?
so I'll check it out.
Congratulations, Michael.
Yeah,
Climate dad in the making right there.
climate data.
You're going to be great.
I just want to. Oh, so sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
Said thanks.
Oh, sweet. Well, we're at time, so I want to respect folks' time. I want to extend a large warmth and gratitude to Elizabeth for her energy, her wisdom, her time here today, and Maria and all of you who participated today. I don't know if Elizabeth, you have some closing remarks, or Maria or Emily or Bob, even, who's been silently listening in, the co-founder of New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action. But thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen. Just thank you to everyone who showed up tonight, and for your courage and sharing, and for all that you're doing that is seen and unseen. We will follow up with a recording and some resources, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much.
Be well.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.